All right, welcome to another episode of Religion and Resilience. Today, we're really excited to have Rabbi Ted Feldman here. Welcome, Ted.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, so excited. I've gotten to know Ted, gotten to know you just a little bit through the Interfaith Council, Sonoma Interfaith Council, and that's been awesome what you do, and you along with Dave Hoffman and the everyone who participates in that. Just a great cause to come together as a collective. But before I get any further, I want to invite anyone who's watching who hasn't subscribed, please click subscribe if you would, and you can enjoy these video casts twice a month. So the next one will be on April 13th. So it's going to be a few weeks away, but April 13th, that will be the next one. And we're still figuring out who that one's going to be, but we're excited that you've joined us today. So, Rabbi Feldman, and Ted, how do you say B'nai?
B'nai.
Okay, so you joined the B'nai Israel Jewish Center of Petaluma on August 1st in 2005. So that's interestingly, that's just around the time when I joined the military.
Okay.
So I joined in July of 2005.
You've probably been to a lot more places in those years than I have.
Well, you've had quite the experience. I'm just looking at your bio, and I'm going to share just a little bit. So it looks like you served as the congregation's interim rabbi from January of 98 till June of 99. And after serving for 10 years, you left your position as executive director of Jewish Family and Children's Services of the East Bay in April of 2005. And prior to that, Ted was the executive director of the Jewish Federation of the Sacramento region. Before coming to California in 92, he was the campaign director of the South Palm Beach County Jewish Federation in Boca Raton, Florida. That's tough duty there, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, it was tough. Beach, sand. Oh.
Yeah, that's we call that in the military hardship duty. That's
yeah, definitely. Oh my God.
In addition to his work in fundraising, Ted was also director of the Jewish Community Relations Council, director of planning, and responsible for the Federation's Jewish education efforts in South Palm Beach County. And Rabbi Feldman has served 2 synagogues during his extensive career in Columbus, Georgia for 8 years, and Boca Raton, Florida for 6 years. And also with a lifelong commitment to the Jewish and general community, he received his undergraduate degree in psychology at Roosevelt University in Chicago and a Master of Arts and ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. And after 14 years in congregational work, Rabbi Feldman entered the community agency system and returned to serve the community at B'nai Israel. And boy, you just bring such a wealth to our community, and grateful to have you on today. And I'll just pass it to you here at the outset, Ted, just to share a little bit about what brought you to being a rabbi. I mean, how does
what brought me to being a rabbi? Oh,
well, and to come to this place of a man of faith that you are in the ministry that you.
oh well. Actually, I decided. I think. I celebrated my bar mitzvah at the age of 13, traditional Jewish celebration. And about 10 months later, I walked into my rabbi's office and I said I wanted to be a rabbi. And that's where it started. And here I am. And actually, I will be retiring at the end of June from my position here and from the rabbinate, and beginning a new course. But so it's been 48 years since I graduated the seminary.
Wow.
I decided when I was 14, and I can't believe I did it. And there were periods of doubt, and I left the congregational world and went into the community agency for 14 years. But when I was a kid, I loved the connection, the community, the sense of joy that I thought came from living a Jewish life. I admired the rabbi with whom I grew up, and I stuck with it. I did stick with it, and yeah, and the faith came slowly but surely in the process too. It was a part of it.
To have that, would you call that a call? Like you sensed a calling when you were 13?
We usually don't. I mean, that's not a term that we generally use within Judaism to have a calling. I felt so. We don't say were you called to the rabbinate, or we don't use that term. I think uh, I felt a leadership call
Mm,
inside of myself. I'll use the word that's common for many people. I felt that I liked being a leader, and however that came to me, whether it came internally, externally from God, or between us somehow. So I was president of my youth group, and I was president of my college age youth group, and chairman of the board of this, and chairman of the board of that. So that's the kind of path that I chose during life, and I'm grateful for most of the choices I make. Obviously, in life, we make choices that we sometimes wish we hadn't, but that's the way it is in life.
yeah. Yeah. So it was a not, I mean, we won't call it a call, but this kind of interest in leadership, this stirring, if you will, of just
Right.
young age, and you looked up to your rabbi that, and that you said the community that you felt or sensed. What was that like, even as a kid? What did
Well,
you?
I sense that there, aside from the prayers and the rituals, that there was some kind of connection among the people in the community, the adults, the older people around whom I operated in the youth program and all that, and it just felt homey and solid. And
Mm,
my home situation wasn't the best in the world, and so it became my second home. And the synagogue has always been my second home, and sometimes I would say my first home at
mm.
different places in life.
Wow, that's so that really, that, I guess that gives some more context to this. At that young age, you didn't feel, there were times when you didn't feel settled at your own home.
Right,
Being in
right,
a synagogue gave you that security or that safety.
right, right. And that's to me a piece of what our topic is for today, etc. Because I do think it's all connected. I would say that's a connected piece for me. That sense of having a community. I know I just started reading the book Outliers, and
Mm,
in the introduction, talking about this Italian community that was formed, and their heart attack rate was lower, and all their health was better than the surrounding communities. And the identified issue had nothing to do with eating pasta or olive oil or any of the things that we might think about, but it had to do with the people's connections with each other
mm.
that strengthened their not only their spiritual or emotional health, but also their physical health.
Yeah, and I can't help but think in Judaism, that's such a profound, important aspect of the faith, isn't it? Even from the roots of you know Israel, and just in the Torah, just the family of God, if you will.
Right. Yeah, and of course, faith is of essence, but um, the faith that we're taught is about. You know, well, I'll put it this way. Abraham Joshua Heschel was a great teacher in contemporary Jewish world, and he wrote a book called God in Search of Man, and in which he posited that we're in a partnership with God. In fact, the cover of it, I've never forgotten, and I don't even think that cover is printed anymore with all the reprints and changes in publishing. But it showed a hand coming down from heaven and another hand reaching up and grasping onto each other. And that we have a role, the human being, we as human beings, as Jews in particular, but in general as human beings, we have a role with, it's a partnership. It's not that we're the little peons of God in this world walking around, but we're in this true partnership to make this world a place where God could live and dwell in our hearts, and where respect for human life and humanity and the resilience that is our subject, so to speak, can build inside of ourselves. So his other book was called Man is Not Alone. So it's that we are in this together with God. And that's always been a comforting idea to me. How that manifests in each person's life, and how different denominations within Judaism carry that out, that's a whole different world. But for me, that sense of partnership with God was a very important piece.
Yeah, that seems to be foundational. And I'm curious, just for maybe briefly here, for any listeners who are unfamiliar with the denominations in Judaism, and could you speak to that just a little bit? You mentioned conservatism. Did you grow up in what denomination of Judaism did you grow up in? And
Grew up in a conservative synagogue, but conservative synagogue should not be equated with political conservatism today. So in the Jewish world, there is the Orthodox, which would be equivalent in some sense to more fundamentalist piece of the Jewish community,
Mhm.
which see literally the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, having been dictated by God to Moses at Mount Sinai in an event. And all from that, all of the rabbinic traditions around observing the commandments that are in there. The conservative movement was developed in response not to the orthodoxy, but to a more liberal movement. But conservative Judaism saw this profound link with God and the commandments, but in a more liberal way, opening up the doors for more contemporary ways of expressing Jewish life. The Reform movement, which is again more liberal, was founded in the middle of the 1800s, right after the conservative movement roots, and it wanted to preach universalism within Judaism, using the prophetic tradition of the Bible as its basis for social justice and social action. And there are some other denominations that have grown up over the years that sprinkle in between there. And they all offer some form of obviously faith in God, but also some way of taking the traditions of Judaism and applying them in the contemporary world in a way that hopefully is meaningful for people. So, and all of them have separate seminaries and where they train their rabbis, etc.
Yeah.
You could have a course on the denominations, just like of any other
Right.
religious group. Yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks for kind of giving that background a little bit, because I think some people, maybe when they hear conservative, they might equate that to the political spectrum or something. But is that did you grow up in a conservative in
Yes,
the
I grew up in a conservative synagogue, but I consider myself mostly a denomination I did not describe. But I'm not formally affiliated, neither is my synagogue. We're independent. But so the teacher of a movement called Reconstructionism was Rabbi Dr. Mordechai Kaplan. And he envisioned that Judaism is not just a religion. He called it an evolving religious civilization.
Oh, wow.
In that definition, Judaism had component parts. It had land, people, language, culture, law, and beliefs. Those 6 things that make up Judaism, that for me is the definition. So sometimes when I'm in dialogue with colleagues of other faiths, we're talking about really way different things in the world. We're talking, so some Jews, because they live in Israel, because they eat Jewish foods, that makes them Jews, right? So
Right.
not this criteria that's based on a particular set of regulations, divine regulations, but rather different ways of coming and being part of this civilization. And I think that definition is this kind of the salad bowl of Jewish life. It holds us all.
Mm, I like that metaphor. Uh, just and again, going to the root of sort of leading into our discussion about um, aspects of the faith that particularly could help uh, people, young, maybe some younger and some older folks in different generations, but certainly the rising generation that seems to kind of balk sometimes at religiosity or being involved with organized religion. And I'm curious, in your from your perspective, I mean, what do you see as the role of Judaism or or this Reconstructionism or Judaism in meeting where we're at with people today?
Yeah, so that's a challenge, of course. I think all uh, organized religion, although sometimes they'll say, "Come to us, we're really disorganized, and you'll be happy. You don't have to fight against organized religion." But um, I think the real issue with that is that American culture has broken down the nature of community. And I believe that the nature of community is what sustains people in moments of trial. And that community can be small enough to be, I'm looking out my window and seeing the group of houses around here. The 6 or 7 houses can be a community and the people in it. Our church, synagogue, mosque community is a community. I think it's our society has broken down for lots of reasons over the past 40, 50 years, starting in my generation earlier with the Vietnam War and things that have torn people apart. And of course, in the last 4 or 5 years, and with COVID-19, and there's been this profound breakdown in connections among people. To me, that's the ill that we're dealing with. There was a sociologist, a book back in the, I think, 60s or 70s, maybe he wrote it later, it was called Bowling Alone.
Uh,
And he started on the reflection on the breakdown of bowling leagues. And that when you go to the bowling alley, if you go to the bowling alley anymore, and I have one across the street from my house, people go by themselves with a friend. But when I was growing up, leagues were a big part.
mhm,
And people just hung out together one night a week, 2 nights a week, and large groups of people came to the bowling alley, and it was friendly competition among the teams, with teams
mhm,
playing against each other. So,
mhm,
as a sociologist, Marshall Sklar broke down the nature of our society and said, with the demise of bowling leagues, we see the demise of the nature of connection among people in our world, where individual freedoms and individual behaviors become the emphasis.
mhm.
And this is the complete opposite of Judaism, in which, and I'm sure other guests on the show may have talked about the same thing, but from our point of view, our responsibility to each other as a people, as a spiritual group, is primary, and human life is primary, and respect for human life, all human life, not just the Jewish people, not this group, that group. All human life is of primary importance. So that breakdown, and so the younger generations now aren't seeking out that sense of community, and that is challenging. And when things get bad in the world, then they may be open to do that. And so creating a welcoming environment that emphasizes respect for the individual, but also teaches us how we connect with each other as human beings and our responsibilities to each other and with each other, I think is one of the keys to future generations coming together. I won't even get into the socioeconomic issues of capitalism, and we're all in competition with each other, and and I'm not a communist in that sense, but just the materialism that's
Right.
come in our capitalist society, which divides people. So many things divide us, and finding the things that are common, which I believe is actually a need for community and for connection. And in that community, then that's a step toward having God as the common denominator to keep
Mhm.
people together.
I really like that concept of trying to build community, but meet the people in their individualistic needs as well,
Right,
trying to ultimately direct them to a common unifier, which is God.
right.
And I, I've been reading Exodus recently, and I can't help but think of the metaphor of the children of Israel coming out of Egypt and going and wandering for 40 years in the desert. And do you see us wandering right now, like our our culture? I guess we're looking for that community, and what it sounds like what you're saying is to help build individual resilience. It requires in the Jewish context requires bringing people into community.
Oh, yes, because
And
each individual
how,
goes. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, well, I was going to say, and maybe using that Exodus as a metaphor is like taking them out of some of the mainstream tendencies that are happening today.
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, in Judaism, the Exodus from Egypt is a, a primary experience of the Jewish people.
Right.
And we recall that Exodus in our prayers daily because of the notion, it wasn't the notion of freedom where, as we understand it today, I can choose to be vaccinated or not. Whatever I want is what counts.
Right.
Uh, but rather, it was a sense of the oppression and the freedom to come together as the Israelite people in the wanderings in the wilderness, entering the promised land, following that Exodus, giving them time to gel together as a community before they went into the promised land. So I think that is a good recall for you to bring in to this discussion. And I would hope that the shards of the split that we find in our society is a uh, sign that in the future we can come together. So the Kabbalists in Judaism taught us that when God created this world, the world was like a vessel. The world was like a vessel. And like as kids, if we used to take a magnifying glass and put the sun up and on the leaf, and the leaf would burn.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we didn't start too many fires in the neighborhood or anything like that.
I did that.
He did that, so
Fires, but yeah.
so that God's when God created this world in this vessel of creation, God's light was so intense that the vessel shattered. And our job is to recreate that vessel. And in Hebrew, that's called tikkun olam, the repair of the world. Our job as individuals from a Jewish perspective is to bring that world in which God's intense presence can be here, bring that vessel back together to make room for God in this world.
Mm.
And so the general discussions around helping the poor, helping the homeless, fixing broken systems of social welfare, etc., crying out against the war in Ukraine, where human lives are being destroyed. All those actions of human beings are necessary to create this, and we call it tikkun olam, the repair of the world.
Wow.
We call it repair of the world. And it's that being involved in the repair of the world that also gives resilience to
Mm.
the individual. Because if everything is only about us, I'm free, my freedom, nobody's going to tell me, no, etc. That's not the kind of world that we're created in. That's
Yeah.
just the
That,
world.
so what you're saying is you have this community that's all focused on a similar, I guess they have a similar focal point, which is to reconstruct the world or put it back together.
Right.
So you have really two powerful resiliency tools going on in the community of in the Jewish communities. You have the community, synagogue, and then people working with one mind, I guess, towards this effort of rebuilding the brokenness.
Yes, and I can't, just like in every denomination of any religious system, I can't account for the behaviors of every single Jewish person, or that everybody thinks in. The framework I'm sharing is my understanding over my career of how Judaism works, and whether individual Jews can identify that for themselves almost doesn't make a difference. It's the behaviors that they're doing and how they're coming together and the mutual respect that we develop that makes the essence of Jewish life.
Yeah, I like that. The essence. Yeah, speaking of that, so it just kind of reminds me or makes me think of you mentioned when you started out early on, you had kind of a challenging upbringing or a challenging childhood, and you were going through a tough time. In addition to the community, and maybe the community, and then this working on reconstructing the world are two of the foundational resiliency tools in your faith that can help build someone's inner strength. Are there others that within the faith that you have leaned on or others have leaned on, other principles that have that help someone who's going through a really rough time, like a contemporary stressful moment, that practice that within Judaism that are really helpful?
And so two thoughts come to mind. One is, um, often when people are going through difficult times, whether it's being, personal emotions or relationships or death, people ask, why is this happening to me? Or why did I get to this and why that? And my understanding of Jewish teachings, why is the wrong question. It may work with a therapist and appropriately, and I mean that in a good way,
Mm.
uh, for a therapist to help us. But the real the real solution to the dilemmas that come with that kind of suffering is not why, it's what am I going to do now that it's happened. So, why did my loved one die? Why am I left alone? Well, the fact is that your loved one did die, or that you are left alone. So the most important question is not the why, because almost any answer we come up with is sometimes worse than the question. You
Mm.
deserved it. God thinks you're a bad person. You made all kinds of mistakes. What kind of answers do we come up with for that? None of those answers come out very well in terms of helping the person. So the other resilience technique is to make sure we're asking the right questions. What am I going to do now that I am alone or that I have lost a loved one? Um, where am I going to find my faith? Where am I going to find my community? Do I have my community? Can I put one together? Which friends can I still rely on? Um, all those kinds of questions that could come in. The whys become very dangerous kinds of questions for the human being. So Judaism, I believe, through the Talmudic system, which taught us about asking questions, to
Mm.
make sure that we're asking the right questions. So that would be an important piece. That's number one. The second piece would be um, that the rituals of Judaism our observance of Sabbath, and for some people, the observing of the dietary laws, for coming to services and following the rituals that we're doing, and the prayers and the order in the prayer book we have. I don't believe that God needs those rituals for our relationship with God. So I believe those rituals become the shared behavior of our people that keep us together. So those rituals are a tool for solidifying our human connections, and at the same time, solidifying our partnership with God.
Oh, okay.
So if we're going to join together and have a special meal for the Sabbath, for our Shabbat, the Passover is coming up, and there are a lot of rituals at the table at homes. Those rituals are the form in which the content of Jewish life gets played out. And so I see those rituals not as pleasing God, but as being the tools to help us strengthen ourselves with each other.
And you mentioned strengthen ourselves with each other in that community, which is so foundational.
Right.
And that also to strengthen the connection with God as well.
Yes. And for those, by the way, we don't go around testing whether people believe in God and stuff like that. So don't necessarily need to ask that question about where people are with God.
Okay.
That's their business. I mean, I will talk about God and talk about how our tradition teaches us about God, but we, just as a practice of community, we don't test people on that. There's no test on that.
And by test, what do you mean by test?
Requiring people to say, I believe in God, or taking a public statement. I mean, there are prayers in the prayer book which are communal and individual, which proclaim our faith in God. That's in the prayer service.
Right.
But
like creed, no public statement of creeds, that kind of thing.
Right. No public statement of creed, right.
So it's much more, and I'm really sensing this deep, I think this communal aspect really meets the loneliness that often people feel, in isolation, and certainly COVID has exacerbated that, but this tendency towards individualism and self-focus, this is really an antidote for that, this aspect of Judaism.
I believe it is. I believe it is, and getting people to open their hearts to it, of course, is if anybody has a divine can opener for that to happen, please send them to me so I can find out. But that's the really hard part in this complex world, with COVID dividing people, a war going on, economic challenges. It's really hard, and so I am hoping that our younger generations will begin to discover that they can't go it alone in this life, that their worlds are further enhanced by connecting with others in a fun way, in a profound way, in whatever way necessary to give them a sense of community.
Is there either a Talmudic story or a story from the Bible that is maybe highlights for you an example of someone who found that community, that religious community that you kind of take as a model within the Jewish, I guess, the conservative tradition?
Well, again, I don't identify as I would just say I'm Jewish. Yeah, I would just say, in fact, people, since we're not affiliated as an institution, people say, "What are you?" I say, "We're Jewish. We're just Jewish." I don't identify with that. So how some a story or nothing is coming to the top. I know that there are lots of pieces of Jewish humor that that take on the world in a way that looks like the lens of Jewish life.
Mm.
So I was just talking to somebody, and she actually told me one that there was one about, and it's always comparing different religions. So it's like, well, the end of the world is coming, and the Pope says, Catholics prepare to meet the end of the world, to meet your Savior, meet the Lord. And the Archbishop of Canterbury says, prepare to meet your Savior. And the Chief Rabbi of Israel says, we have 3 days to figure out how to save the world. You know, and, which is there is at least from the Jewish point of view. I can't speak from the Catholic or the Church of England point of view. From a Jewish point of view, that's how we would view it. What are
Yeah.
we going to do? What is our responsibility to
Mm.
do to make this world better? What it's our we this is a shared responsibility. This isn't all about what God is doing and what God is not doing in the world. It's
Yeah.
the partnership that I alluded to earlier in
Mhm.
God in search of man. So, that a story like that is for me a teacher, not about what Catholicism might have to say, because I'd certainly be interested in taking that story and having that discussion with a Catholic priest and a Protestant minister, etc. But for me, it's the Jewish part of it, which is figuring out how we're going to make the world better and how we're going to survive. I believe that the study of those texts was one of the keys to our survival of the traditional Jewish texts of ancient times.
Like that. I when you were saying that, it made me think that for someone who may be struggling with a sense of purpose in their life, or maybe not having a direction and feeling isolated, I mean, and the stress of life getting to them, active participation in those types of activities where you're actually going out and taking responsibility and doing something and then seeing things get done. Maybe not in 3 days the whole world saved, but
Yeah,
but
I know. Yeah,
but
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 yeah,
doing things would give a person a real sense of purpose in their life.
right. Well, I think that purpose is uh, is to use the tools that we have been give God that are God given through our creation to make the world, just like in science and medicine and technology, all the things that we're creating, taking care of ourselves, finding hope. I believe we have the tools that as human beings to be able to do that. And that Judaism has taught that to me.
Yeah. So where for someone who may be kind of just wanting to get their feet more wet in Judaism, and maybe someone who's grew up Jewish but wants to become more engaged, where would you tell them to start? I mean, what's the best way to get more?
Well, I mean, so some people are allergic to coming in the door of the organized religion building, right? They don't want to go in there. I would encourage them to open that door and talk to people, meet the people, talk to the rabbi, uh, to make some initial connection. Obviously, there are books one can read. There's Living Judaism by Rabbi Wayne Dosick is a wonderful book that I use as an introduction. I think I mentioned to you last week, and I haven't actually had a chance to read it. I just got this book here called Choosing Hope, and
Uh-huh.
teachings of the heritage of Judaism, which spends a lot of time talking about this. For Jews and for my people, education is one of the keys to survival. You can't make yourself get through a situation unless you understand it, unless you have a knowledge of it. And based on that knowledge is how you're going to get yourself through it and use all the tools that are available to be able to survive with hope and resilience in this world.
I appreciate that. Maybe we've just got a couple minutes left, and I'm curious if you could just sort of capture for you personally, and you said 40, you're about ready to retire after 48 years, you said?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's amazing. 48 years of in ministry. And what is, when you kind of look into your own treasure chest of spiritual and ministerial experiences, what is it for you personally, Ted, that like gets you through hard times within your faith? Is
I have to go back to the same answer, the people. It's
or
God, but it's always, it's first of all, the people all have God in them,
mm,
right? And so my connection, there's a very beautiful, in Hebrew, there's abbreviation for God's name with two Hebrew letters, and the letters are the letter Yud in Hebrew, and the two of them together are an abbreviation for Adonai, which is God's, how we pronounce God's name in Hebrew at this point.
mm-hmm,
The word Yud also means Yid, from the Yiddish pronunciation of that, which means Jew. So that when two Yuds come together, when two Jews come together, there's God. That makes God's name. And I would extend that personally when two human beings come together, because I don't feel we have a monopoly on God. So for me, this discussion with you is God. I mean, it's about connecting as two people and asking questions. And so that has been my connection. That has been my connection. And in my retirement letter to my congregation, I said that. I said, I don't believe that God has a divine spreadsheet where God keeps track of what we did, didn't do, what foods we ate, what we didn't eat, and all that. I think that the ultimate is how we are treating each other as human beings, how we connect with each other, and the role that Judaism can have for us as Jews and for others in their own faiths to make the world better through how we connect with each other. And when I was in seminary, I was also taught that by one teacher who said rabbis only have one sermon to give in their life, and they just give different one. They just repackage it every week. And if I were to look at mine over these 48 years, it's exactly what I'm saying to you today
mm-hmm,
about this connection, this community, the notion of our godly responsibilities to make this world better through fulfilling the commandments that we receive in Torah, but through the behaviors of human beings in partnership with God.
mm. That's beautifully said. I don't think I can say anything more after that, other than uh, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your connection with me, and I felt it on other occasions too when we've gotten a chance to dialogue through Zoom and on the phone and things like that. But I too can feel that right now. Feel that in this connection, in this relationship, that God is present,
Right.
even guiding in a lot of cases, guiding how we connect and how we communicate. And so that makes complete sense that you would really thrive off of that, and that helps you get through challenges.
It does. It does.
Thank you so much for being here today, Ted. It's been wonderful chat,
It's wonderful for me too.
and I wish you peace and enjoy your time at Tahoe.
Thank you, and shalom to you. Peace to you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.